It all started on a warm, humid summer evening. The kind where the air clung to your skin, thick with the promise of something electric in the air. I met Ethan at a rooftop party, a friend of a friend, standing by the edge with a whiskey in his hand, looking like he had stepped out of a movie. There was something magnetic about him, an energy I couldn't quite place. His dark eyes seemed to hold secrets, and his smile hinted at a dangerous edge. I wasn't looking for anything that night, but the moment our eyes met, it felt inevitable. As if fate had brought us together to set off a chain of events neither of us could stop. He crossed the distance between us with a confidence that made my pulse quicken, his gaze never leaving mine. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice low and smooth, like the night itself. "I'm Emma," I replied, my heart already racing, though I didn't know why. From that moment on, it was like we were the only two people at that party. The world faded away as we talked, about nothing, about everything. There was an instant connection, a spark that I hadn't felt in years. He was charming, witty, and when he looked at me, it was as though I was the only person who mattered. I didn't know it then, but that night would be the beginning of something that would change my life forever. Ethan and I were a whirlwind. Our relationship burned fast and bright from the start. Every day with him was a new adventure, a new high. We traveled, explored hidden corners of the city, stayed up late talking about our dreams and desires. It felt like I had found my soulmate, someone who saw me for exactly who I was and loved me for it. The love between us was intense, all-consuming, the kind of love that made everything else seem dull by comparison. When we were together, the rest of the world disappeared. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, couldn't stand to be apart for too long. I felt alive in a way I never had before. But with passion came intensity, and with intensity came complications. Ethan had a past, a history of relationships that had ended in disaster, and though I knew about it, I never thought it would come between us. I thought I was different, that we were different, but slowly, cracks started to form in the perfect picture we had painted. It was subtle at first, little things that didn't seem like much. Ethan would cancel plans last minute, or disappear for hours without an explanation. I brushed it off as him being busy. He had a demanding job after all. But deep down, a nagging feeling started to creep in. I ignored it, not wanting to spoil the perfect image of us. Then came the late nights. He'd claim he was stuck at work or out with friends. But there was something off. He was more distant, less present. I convinced myself that I was being paranoid, that everything was fine. But the gnawing feeling of doubt only grew stronger. One night, after he didn't come home until well after midnight, I confronted him. I wanted the truth. His eyes were tired, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in them. Guilt, maybe? But he denied everything, soothing me with that same charm that had drawn me in from the beginning. You know I'd never hurt you," he said softly, pulling me into his arms. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. So I did. I pushed the doubt aside and let myself fall back into the intoxicating love we shared. But the truth always finds a way of revealing itself. I found out about the affair a few months later. It wasn't something dramatic. No screaming matches or caught-in-the-act moments. I discovered it by accident, scrolling through his phone one night when he was in the shower. I wasn't even looking for anything in particular, but then I saw her name, Maya. My stomach dropped as I read through their messages. They weren't explicit, but they didn't have to be. The inside jokes, the late-night texts. It was clear. They had been seeing each other for months, behind my back. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Everything I had believed about us shattered in an instant. The love I had thought was so perfect, so strong, was tainted. Couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, and tears blurred my vision as I threw his phone down and walked out of the apartment. Ethan tried to explain, to apologize, but his words felt hollow. He begged for forgiveness, swore it was a mistake, but I couldn't hear him. The pain was too raw, the wound too deep. For days, I shut myself off from the world, drowning in the hurt. How could he do this to me? To us? We were supposed to be different. But then, something strange happened. As the days passed, I found myself thinking about Maya, about the woman Ethan had cheated with. Who was she? What was her story? I realized I needed answers not just from Ethan but from her. I found her online easily enough, a mutual connection through some friends. And in a moment of madness, or maybe clarity, I reached out to her. To my surprise, Maya responded. She wasn't the villain I had painted her to be in my mind. In fact, she had no idea about me, about our relationship. Ethan had lied to her too, leading her to believe he was single. She was as devastated as I was when she found out the truth. We met for coffee, and what I expected to be a confrontation turned into something else entirely. As we talked, I realized that we had both been victims of Ethan's lies. Maya wasn't the enemy. She was just another person caught in the web of his deceit. The conversation with her brought me clarity, and for the first time since I had found out about the affair, I felt like I could breathe again. The anger, the hurt, it was still there, but I could see a way forward. I could see that I deserved better. When I confronted Ethan again, it wasn't the emotional, tear-filled argument I had imagined. I was calm, clear, and determined. I told him I knew the truth about Maya, about everything. He didn't deny it this time. He couldn't. He begged me to stay, promised he would change, that he would do anything to fix what he had broken. And despite everything, a part of me still loved him. A part of me wanted to believe that we could find our way back to what we had been. But trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. I told him I needed time. I needed space to figure out if we could ever recover from this. Ethan moved out of our apartment, and for the first time in months, I was alone. But it wasn't the loneliness I had feared. Felt like freedom. Freedom to heal, to rediscover myself, to decide what I really wanted. Months passed. Ethan and I stayed in touch, and slowly we began to rebuild something, though it wasn't what we had before. We went to therapy, worked through our issues, and for a while it seemed like maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to make it work. But as time went on, I realized something. I didn't want to go back to what we had. That whirlwind love, that intensity, it was thrilling, but it was also exhausting. I wanted something more stable, more real. I wanted a love that didn't burn out, that didn't leave me questioning my worth. And so, I let Ethan go. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. I needed to move on, to start fresh, to find the kind of love that wasn't built on lies and deception. And in the end, that's exactly what I did. Because love, real love, isn't just about passion and intensity. It's about trust, honesty, and being with someone who sees you for exactly who you are, flaws and all. Looking back, I don't regret my time with Ethan. He taught me a lot about myself, about love, about what I deserve. And now, I'm ready for something new, something brighter, a love that lasts. After Ethan, I wasn't sure if I was ready to love again. The emotional roller coaster of our relationship had left me exhausted, wary of trusting anyone with my heart. But life has a funny way of surprising you just when you think you're done with surprises. A few months after ending things with Ethan, I met Mark. It wasn't some grand, cinematic moment like when I met Ethan. No stolen glances across a crowded room or electric chemistry that lit the air on fire. Mark was different. He was steady, calm, and unlike anyone I'd ever been drawn to before. We met through mutual friends at a small dinner party. He was easy to talk to, funny in a quiet, unassuming way, and there was a gentleness to him that immediately put me at ease. There were no games, no underlying tension, no mystery to unravel. With Mark, what you saw was what you got. And after everything I had been through, that was exactly what I needed. Mark and I didn't rush into anything. After Ethan, I had promised myself I would take my time, be cautious, and focus on healing. But Mark never pressured me. He understood that I was still figuring things out, still piecing my heart back together, and he gave me all the space I needed. We started with simple things, casual dinners, long walks, late-night conversations that never felt forced. It was easy, natural. Slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. With Mark, there was no whirlwind, no burning passion that made me lose myself. Instead, there was something deeper, something that felt more like home. As time passed, I realized that what Mark and I had was the kind of love I had been searching for all along. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was real. It was the kind of love that doesn't make you doubt your worth, doesn't leave you wondering where you stand. Just when I thought I had finally moved on, the past came knocking. One evening, out of the blue, I got a text from Ethan. "Ethan, hey, can we talk? I've been thinking about you." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, a flood of emotions crashing into me all at once. Anger, confusion, curiosity. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to pretend like he didn't exist anymore. But another part of me, one I wasn't proud of, wanted to know what he had to say. I showed the text to Mark later that night. His reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't get jealous or angry. He didn't tell me to block Ethan and move on. Instead, he just nodded thoughtfully and said, "If you need closure, you should talk to him. I trust you." His calmness surprised me, but it also solidified what I already knew. Mark was different. He didn't see Ethan as a threat because he knew that what we had was stronger, more solid than anything Ethan and I ever shared. The next day, I met Ethan for coffee. Felt strange, seeing him again after so long. He looked the same, yet something was different. Maybe it was me who had changed. Maybe it was both of us. He started by apologizing, really apologizing, in a way he never had before. He admitted that he had been selfish, that he had taken me for granted, that he had made terrible mistakes. For the first time, he wasn't trying to charm his way out of accountability. He was owning up to what he had done. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. "I know I messed up, but I still care about you." Hearing those words didn't have the effect on me that I thought they would. Once, I had wanted nothing more than for Ethan to admit he was wrong, to tell me he still cared. But now it didn't matter. I didn't need his validation anymore. I had moved past him, past the version of myself that had been so deeply intertwined with him. "I'm glad you found clarity," I said, my voice calm. "But I've moved on, Ethan. We're not the same people we were back then." He nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of regret and understanding. "I get it. I needed to say it." That was it. There was no dramatic moment, no grand gesture. Just two people acknowledging the past and moving forward. It was the closure I didn't know I needed, and as I walked away from that cafe, I felt lighter than I had in years. That night, I came home to Mark, and as soon as I saw him, I knew. I knew that what we had was real, lasting. It wasn't just the calm after the storm. It was the love I had been waiting for all along. We sat together on the couch, and I told him about my meeting with Ethan. There was no tension, no drama. Mark listened, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. When I finished, he just smiled and wrapped his arms around me. "I'm glad you got what you needed," he said softly, "and I'm glad you're here with me." I looked at him, my heart full, and realized that this was what love was supposed to feel like. Safe, steady, and deeply fulfilling. It wasn't about constant excitement or living on the edge. It was about showing up for each other, day in and day out. It was about trust and communication, about building a life together. In Mark's arms, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known before. This was my new beginning. My chance to build something real, something beautiful. As time went on, Mark and I grew even closer. We didn't have the kind of love that burned bright and fast, but we had something better, something that lasted. We built a life together, one full of laughter, quiet moments, and a deep, abiding trust. We didn't need drama or chaos to keep things exciting. What we had was enough. Ethan became a distant memory, someone who had been part of my journey but not the destination. And that was okay. He had taught me valuable lessons about love, trust, and what I truly deserved. But in the end, he wasn't the one who could give me the kind of love I needed. Mark and I didn't need the highs and lows that defined my past relationships. We had each other, and that was more than enough. Love isn't about finding someone who sweeps you off your feet in a whirlwind romance. It's about finding someone who stays. Someone who stands by your side when the excitement fades and life becomes real. And in Mark, I had found that person. Together, We faced the ups and downs of life, knowing that no matter what came our way, we would face it as a team. This was the love I had always wanted. The kind of love that didn't just survive the storm but thrived in its aftermath. After that night, Mark and I continued to build something stronger than either of us had ever known. It wasn't always perfect, but it was real and it was ours. There were no grand declarations or constant reassurances. We simply existed together, creating a life full of shared moments, quiet nights, and steady love. We moved in together a few months later. I remember the day we unpacked boxes in our new apartment, light streaming in through the windows, casting golden shadows on the floor. Mark set up his record player, and we danced in the living room, laughing like we were teenagers, spinning to the crackling sounds of old vinyl. For the first time in years, I felt settled, not just in the physical sense, but emotionally. With Mark, there was no second-guessing, no wondering if I was enough or if he would stray. There was a sense of mutual understanding, a wordless agreement that we were in this together. It was love without the drama, without the constant need for reassurance. It was love that simply was. But love, even the strongest kind, is not without its challenges. There were moments when we disagreed, when the stresses of life chipped away at the easy comfort we had built. Mark's job was demanding, and sometimes he came home late, exhausted, barely able to keep his eyes open. There were nights when I would lie in bed, feeling the distance between us, wondering if we were slowly drifting apart like so many couples do over time. But those doubts never lasted long. Mark wasn't the kind of man to let problems fester. Whenever we hit a rough patch, he would sit down with me, talk it through, and make sure we were okay. He had this way of making me feel heard, making me feel important, even in the midst of life's chaos. One night, after a particularly stressful week at work, I snapped at him for something small, something that didn't even matter. The kind of fight that starts out of nowhere and spirals before you realize what's happening. But instead of fighting back, Mark just sighed and pulled me into his arms. "Hey," he said softly, "I know this week's been tough. Let's not take it out on each other." His calmness, his ability to diffuse the situation, made me realize how far I had come from the volatile relationship I had once had with Ethan. With Mark, there were no mind games, no manipulation, no walking on eggshells. We were equals, partners, and no matter what life threw at us, we faced it together. One night, almost a year after we had moved in together, Mark surprised me in a way I never saw coming. It was a quiet evening, just like any other. We had finished dinner, and I was curled up on the couch, reading a book while Mark tinkered with his record collection. The sound of a familiar song filled the room. Our song, the one we had danced to that first night in our apartment. I smiled, looking up from my book, and that's when I saw him, standing there in the middle of the living room, holding a small box in his hand. My heart stopped. "Mark?" He smiled, that steady, reassuring smile that I had fallen in love with, and slowly sank to one knee. "Emma," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I never knew what love was supposed to feel like until I met you. You've made my life better in every way, and I can't imagine spending it with anyone else. Will you marry me?" For a moment, time stood still. I felt a rush of emotions. Joy, excitement, disbelief. But above all, I felt peace. This was right. This was everything I had ever wanted. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible through the lump in my throat. "Yes, of course." Mark slipped the ring onto my finger, and before I knew it, we were both laughing, crying, and holding each other as if the world around us had disappeared. Our wedding wasn't a grand, elaborate affair. We kept it simple, just close friends and family gathered at a small beachside venue. The day was perfect, blue skies, the sound of waves crashing in the distance, and the feeling of love surrounding us. As we stood there, exchanging vows under the setting sun, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. From the whirlwind romance with Ethan that had burned out so painfully, to the calm, steady love I had found with Mark. It was a journey I hadn't expected, but one that had shaped me into the person I was standing there that day. Our vows were simple, but they carried the weight of everything we had been through. Mark promised to love me not just in the good times, but in the hard ones, too. I promised to stand by his side, no matter what challenges came our way. And as we kissed, sealing our vows, I knew that this was the beginning of the rest of our lives. Life didn't become perfect after we got married. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt and frustration. But that's the thing about real love. It's not about avoiding hardship. It's about choosing each other through it all. Mark and I continued to grow together, navigating life's twists and turns as a team. There were times when things were tough, when work got stressful, or when we disagreed about the future. But no matter what, we always came back to each other. Over the years, we built a life that was full of joy, laughter, and above all, love. We traveled the world together, created new memories, and faced every obstacle with the knowledge that we could get through anything, as long as we had each other. And as I sit here now, looking back on everything that's happened, I realize that love isn't just about passion or excitement. It's about showing up, day after day, even when things are hard. It's about building a foundation of trust, respect, and unwavering support. Mark taught me what it meant to love and be loved in return, not just in the grand moments, but in the small, everyday ones. And that's the kind of love that lasts. The kind of love that, years later, still makes me smile when I think about how lucky I am to have found it. As the years passed, our life together unfolded in ways I could never have imagined. Mark and I built a family, not just with children but with memories, with love shared between close friends and family that supported us through thick and thin. Each day brought something new, sometimes challenges, sometimes quiet joys, but always the steady presence of a partner who never let me question my worth. We found happiness in the little things, the smell of coffee in the morning, the way he would kiss my forehead when I least expected it, the long conversations on the porch as the sun set. It was in those moments that I realized love wasn't something to chase or fight for. It was something you nurtured, something you chose every single day. There were inevitable ups and downs, of course. Life has a way of testing the strongest bonds. When I lost my mother, Mark was my rock, holding me through the nights when the grief felt unbearable. When Mark struggled with his own career setbacks, I was there, reassuring him that no matter what, we'd face it together. We learned that love wasn't about avoiding pain, but about having someone beside you when you needed them the most. In every tear, every moment of doubt, we rediscovered what made us strong. And in every moment of joy, every anniversary, every new adventure, we celebrated the life we had built together. Years later, when our children had grown and flown from the nest, it was just the two of us again, sitting in the quiet of our home, watching the world outside our window. Our love, once new and uncertain, had become an unbreakable bond. We were no longer just lovers or even just partners. We were each other's home. We spent our days traveling, exploring new places, and falling in love with the world all over again. But more than that, we found peace in each other's company. We didn't need excitement to keep us going. We simply needed each other. It was in the comfort of his embrace that I felt truly safe, truly loved. Now, sitting on our porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon just like we did all those years ago, I reflect on how far we've come. The whirlwind romance with Ethan that had once seemed so important now feels like a distant memory. A chapter of my life that taught me about passion, about heartbreak, but also about resilience. Mark was my calm after the storm, the man who showed me that real love wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping romance. It was about the everyday commitment, the quiet moments of trust and affection that build a life. And as the years passed, I realized that I had chosen the right path, the path that led me to peace, to fulfillment, to true, lasting love. In the end, I learned that love is a journey, not a destination. It's a choice you make every day, in the way you listen, the way you forgive, the way you stand by someone through their darkest hours. Mark and I didn't have a perfect life, but we had a real life, one filled with all the highs and lows that come with true commitment. Our love was the kind that left a legacy, not just in our children and grandchildren, but in the way we treated each other, the way we showed up for one another. It's the kind of love I hope everyone finds in their lifetime. The kind of love that, even after all these years, still makes me feel like the luckiest person in the world. And as the sun sets on this chapter of our lives, I know that we'll continue this journey together, side by side, as we always have. Looking back, I can see now that my journey wasn't about finding the perfect love. It was about finding the love that was perfect for me. And with Mark, I found a partner who didn't just love me in the good times, but stood with me through the storms. Together, we built a life, a family, a love that would last not just for our lifetime, but beyond. In the end, love isn't about the grand romantic gestures or fiery passions. It's about choosing someone every single day. And as I look at Mark, sitting beside me, I know that I made the right choice. The choice to love deeply, patiently, and endlessly. Because in the end, love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice. And I would choose him every time.